Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Now for those of you who have been watching my videos recently, yes, I did get a haircut. And for those of you who are new around here, welcome aboard. Now, the topic of today's video is of course considering all the different factors you must take into account when deciding what type of gaming monitor you want to purchase. So the format of the video is going to be such that I'm going to talk about all the different aspects that you must consider when purchasing a gaming monitor separately, and then I'm going to leave timestamps down below so you could jump to different parts if you're only interested in, say, refresh rate. And that's the only thing that you really need to know more about when making your purchase. You just jump straight to that. All right, with that out of the way, let's get right into it. First off, guys, I just want to emphasize the difference between different types of gaming monitors and how important your choice is by illustrating how different the two of these monitors are. Take this one, and you might think at first that the only real big difference is just the size of the monitors. But in reality, these monitors could not be more different. True, they're both 1080p, but the biggest difference is not actually the size. This one's 144 Hz, so it has more than double the refresh rate of this one, which is only 60, something you would never be able to tell just by looking at them. So ignore looks when you're considering a gaming monitor. Additionally, this one's the only one that would actually be compatible with my current PC that I use on a day-to-day basis, because this one only supports VGA and DVI port connections, ones that are largely outdated and are not on most modern graphics cards anymore, while this one supports HDMI and display ports, the gold standards of display cable connections today. I'm going to talk more about those connections later on in this video though. But that being said, there's one way in which this monitor is actually better than this one, believe it or not, besides the fact that this one costs twice as much, and that is because they're the same resolution and this one has a bigger screen. That means that the pixel density is actually higher on this one, so its image would appear sharper. But I'm definitely going to talk about that more later because that's an important compromise that you guys need to understand before making your purchase. So let's get into the qualities of the monitors that you should be looking at. So the first quality I'm going to talk about is probably the one that you guys are probably the most familiar with, and that's just the refresh rate of the monitor, the amount of hertz. So there's commonly like 60 hertz, 75 even exists, but there's often 60 and 144 are two very common amounts. Like the one I showed you before, one was 60, one was 144. But anyways, you definitely want to make sure to buy a 60 hertz one if you do not have that much money and you're not going to be doing any type of like esport gaming that you don't need a very high refresh rate monitor for. Because if you're just playing games, maybe you don't have that powerful of a graphics card and you're not going to be able to get that much more than 60 FPS in most games, then 60 Hz monitor is your best bet, especially if you are on a budget. But that being said, if you're playing esport titles, I would say at least 144 is basically a must. And you're going to want to set aside extra money in your budget to go towards a better monitor. You do not want to be playing esport titles all the time with a 60 Hz monitor. Because what that would mean is that you're not seeing more than 60 frames, which is definitely not something you want in esports, where, as Nvidia says, frames win games. But they're not wrong. Next up, I'm going to talk about both resolution and screen size, since these two go hand in hand. So as far as resolution goes, there's a common misconception that higher resolution directly means a sharper image. And in reality, what means a sharper image is higher pixel density, which is actually depending on the ratio of your resolution to your screen size. So as I said before, if two screens have the same resolution, the one that is smaller is going to look sharper because of its higher pixel density, the same amount of pixels in a smaller amount of space. So it makes sense that the picture would look sharper. So that's why when you're thinking about screen size, you don't always think that just because a screen is bigger than another one, it's better, that you want to get the biggest screen you can afford of a certain resolution. No, that's not what you want to do, because you should actually value the sharpness of the image. On a smaller screen, 1080p is going to look quite good, while on a 27-inch monitor, it does not look very good at all. In fact, 1080p on a 17-inch monitor looks exactly the same as 1440p on a 24-inch monitor, just to give you an idea of how this works. I would not recommend buying any monitor larger than 24 inches if you're buying a 1080p one. Now that I've talked a bit about screen size in relation to resolution, let's just talk about what resolution you should be shooting for. Really, anything more than 1080p is sort of like a luxury, and if you're on a budget at all, a tight budget, and you don't really have extra money to expend on gaming, 1080p is your best bet. And just the way to, of course, get that 1080p not looking bad would be to get a 21-inch monitor. But that being said, if you do have the money, you should definitely get a high resolution monitor because it is very nice to game at 1440p or above instead of 1080p. But two things, make sure you have a graphics card that can handle it, and weigh that with how many hertz you want your monitor to have. What I mean by that is, if you're getting a 240 hertz monitor, you're not going to be able to get like 1440p or 4K, most likely. It'll be either very expensive or non-existent. So you basically have to make a trade-off between refresh rate and resolution. You could either get maybe a 4K 60 hertz monitor or a 240 hertz 1080p monitor. And of course, if you're an esports gamer, the higher refresh rate, slower resolution monitor would certainly be preferable. And if you're someone who plays a lot of visual Safari AAA games, then absolutely the higher resolution, lower refresh rate monitor would be better, since if you're not playing competitively, 60 hertz is enough to get by, and a 4K 60 hertz monitor is a lot cheaper than a 4K 144 hertz monitor. Okay, next up, I just want to briefly mention a new technology that some of you may have heard of called OLED that is somewhat recently coming to PC monitors. And what it does basically is make the image look a lot better with like the colors, like blacks provide a lot better contrast and stuff like that. And you just have to see one to actually be able to experience what it looks like. So if you're even considering purchasing an OLED monitor, I would certainly recommend going to a store that has one on display and actually looking at it before you purchase it to see if it is worth the extra money, because they are usually quite a bit more expensive because of this new technology, which is OLED as opposed to LCD, the traditional type of monitor lighting. But I would only recommend OLED if you have a very high budget and you've already gotten like 4K and stuff like that and high refresh rates. I wouldn't put it at the priority, but if you're someone who really likes the way they look, of course it's something to consider, and it's something that's out there. Now, next thing is widescreen displays. So these are not for most people, but again, it's a matter of preference. And depending on what type of games you want to play, it might be something for you. This goes hand in hand with curved displays, which are a much more common thing in gaming monitors. And again, it's just up to whether or not you prefer that. Usually if the screen is very big, then you are going to want curved. But in general, I'm going to discourage big screens because of the lack of pixel density. The only exception to that would be if you're sitting far away from your computer, like you're using it maybe like a TV a lot with a controller on the couch. That would maybe be an exception where pixel density does not matter so much and you might want a bigger display. But anyway, as far as curved and widescreen displays go, again, I think you need to try those for yourself in a store. I know it's hard to go to a store these days because of like the pandemic and stuff like that, but I'm going to still say if you can try to go to Micro Center or something like that, or maybe a friend's house, I wouldn't recommend buying either of these curved or widescreen without actually seeing what it looks like for yourself. So just a couple of words on compatibility. So the most important compatibility thing is make sure that your monitor and your graphics card share a display port. Doesn't have to be all the same, of course, but at least one that they have in common. Otherwise, you're gonna have to get adapters, which the third-party ones are not always that trustworthy, and that's extra money. So just to save yourself that headache or having to wait for one to arrive, just make sure that they do match up. Your graphics card and your monitor have the same connector. Also, this is less important, but still, it would definitely be nice to get a monitor that has VESA compatibility. VESA is basically like a type of mounting hardware on the back of your monitor that is universal. So if you get one that's VESA compatible, you're going to have a ton of different third-party mounts that you can hook up your monitor to. Maybe you want to add like an arm in the future so that you could just go ahead and manipulate the angle and position of your monitor so easily. So VESA is quite common, and it should not be hard for you to find a monitor that you want in other qualities that does support VESA mounting hardware as well, and I do highly recommend it. It's not usually something that you have to pay any sort of premium for. Anyhow, now there are other qualities you could also look at when considering a monitor. There are countless ones actually if you count all of them. Like some other ones would be like what response time your monitor has, and should you get a VA, a TN, or an IPS panel. But all of those things, I'm not going to go into that much detail because I don't want this video to be an hour and a half. And also, those are sort of minor things that are not as important really as most of the other stuff that I've covered in this video. But if you do want to see a video of me going into more detail on that, please let me know down in the comments, or let me know if there's any other videos you want to see. I do take requests, guys. So just to summarize, I'm going to split up gamers into two categories for the sake of simplicity. There's the ones that are more focused on esport titles. Competitive titles that are not very graphically demanding is essentially how I'm defining that term. And then there's the people focused on AAA visual safari types of games, stuff like Red Dead Redemption 2 and stuff like that, where you really care, they're very graphically demanding and you don't need that many FPS to play it. So the people who are more focused on esports, basically your main priority above anything is going to be refresh rate of your monitor. And you can basically discount almost anything else. Of course, make sure that, like I said, that your monitor is compatible with your graphics card so you don't need an adapter. But besides that, pretty much the only thing you'll care about is refresh rate. I mean, don't get like a 720p monitor, but like a 1080p would be fine if you have a high refresh rate. That's what you want. And then for visual safari type gamers, you're going to want to shoot for 4K. Of course, I'm not saying that most of you will probably be able to really afford that because 4K monitors are very expensive. You'll need a very expensive graphics card for them if you're playing visual safari type games, but 4K is really what the ideal resolution is, but you're probably going to end up playing at like 1440p is really a sweet spot in the mind of a lot of gamers. But either way, you're going to want to prioritize resolution. Remember, not too large of a screen so the image remains sharp. But you want to prioritize resolution and stuff like OLED and just qualities that make the picture look better in general. You can go to a store and see which pictures look best on those monitors and then decide based on how it looks. Whereas if you're more focused on esports, you're not really going to be able to tell the frame rate by looking at a monitor, but you just have to buy one, maybe even online. It doesn't matter, you don't really need to see it. You just want to make sure to get one with an adequate frame rate, at least 144 hertz, I would say, honestly, for like titles like CSGO and Valorant and stuff like that. But 240 wouldn't hurt if you could afford it and you play very competitively and you think that you could benefit from the extra refresh rate so that you can actually see more frames in game. Now, before I let you go, I just want to give you guys some good recommendations. So if you're more of an esport gamer that's on more of a budget, I'd recommend something like this. Go ahead and pause it if you want to take a look at that. I'm going to leave links to all these products down in the description though. If you're an esport gamer but you have a bit higher of a budget, I'd recommend something like this. And if you're more of a visual safari focused gamer and you're on a budget, I recommend something like this. And if you're not on a budget, I recommend something a little more like this. That's about all for today, guys, but I make a new video every single Sunday if you guys didn't know, so hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss anything. Hit that like button and leave me a comment if you have any requests for future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.